This day is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, kind of like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having those two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, September 1933, Upton Sinclair began his campaign for governor of California. Sinclair had run as a socialist candidate for Senate in 22, then as a socialist candidate for governor in 26 and 30, and now here he was again declaring for the 1934 election, and this time he switched his party and registered as a Democrat because he thought his chances of winning would be a little better running as a Democrat. And I will spoil it for you folks. His chances were a little bit better, but he did not win. He lost to the incumbent Republican, but he got a pretty impressive 38% of the vote amid record-breaking turnout in a super fascinating election in California. It was called at the time the race of the century. It was maybe the first to feature attack ads and lots of other kind of modern dirty tricks, which we will get into. But then there's also this larger question of why Upton Sinclair is running for office over and over after having made such a big impact in other ways. You probably know the name Upton Sinclair, but, one of the most influential writers of the first part of the 20th century. His muckraking books exposed corporate corruption. They led directly to labor reforms. So I think this is the first time we've really talked about Sinclair on the show, but we will do a little bit of him and a biography of him, and then also talk about this political second act of his. I was much more familiar with his writing and activism than I was with his political life, which is really interesting. So, here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Did you also read The Jungle freshman year of college the way that I did?
I don't know if I read it freshman year, but I actually did my honors thesis on Upton Sinclair and the
There
Jungle,
you
so
go.
I'm excited about this conversation.
Amazing. Well, we should just kick it to you, but yeah.
I feel like AP English maybe or something like that. I vividly have certain passages in my head.
Yeah.
Yes, everybody knows exactly what they are. It's the pure leaf lard and the guy falling into the vat.
Yeah. No, I remember it leaving a big impression on me too. Shout out to Sean McCann, who taught a great course on the progressive era that I took in college. But yeah, so Niki, tell us about Upton Sinclair and the Jungle and the kind of his activism through writing, and then we'll get to his activism through politics.
So Upton Sinclair was one of the leading muckrakers of the early 20th century. These were the people who were exposing corruption, trying to affect political change through these sometimes very lurid, emotional, sentimental writings in order to kind of get the public up in arms about particular political issues. And for Upton Sinclair, it actually wasn't like we need our food to be cleaner. He actually, as you can tell from the political career that he had, he was interested in socialism. And so for those of you who have read The Jungle, you definitely remember the parts of rats and nails and people falling into the sausage. But, the last third of the novel is about the creation of a workers' revolution in a workers' paradise. And Upton Sinclair, who would often talk about this after the book, the book leads to all of these reforms in food labeling and making sure that food is unspoiled and that it is clean. The Pure Food and Drug Act comes out soon after the book. He says, "I aimed for the public's heart and I hit them in the stomach." He shows this image of a worker falling into this vat of sausage, and people cared more about the sausage than the worker. And so Upton Sinclair has this experience of affecting real political change as a writer, but not affecting the political change that he wanted. And I think that explains why he doesn't really transition out of being a writer, as we'll talk about, but why he transitions into electoral politics.
he has this platform that he puts together for his campaign for governorship that he calls EPIC, and it's End Poverty in California. And he has these ideas that, really are socialist in nature. He is a socialist. I mean, he ran as a socialist candidate for U.S. Senate in 1922 and 26 and 30. And then he believed that he could get more traction if he ran as a Democrat, which I think is interesting, too, because a lot of people tend to run as a third party so that they can push, the left or the right to the other to come more to the center. But I think him running as a Democrat was also himself seeing himself as a real candidate, as like someone who could actually win and be taken seriously, and not someone that just wanted to like push issues.
And probably also as a response to, in 1932, the election of Franklin Roosevelt, right? Suddenly the Democratic Party looks far more progressive and far more willing to tackle economic issues than perhaps it did in an earlier era.
Yeah. And I mean, this is, I guess, just reflects how sort of cynical or maybe realistic my modern sort of sense of politics is. But I just find it so remarkable that, someone who has had a real effect, both on the sort of story, the American story, but also actual policy, still also truly deeply seems to believe in the ability to go into government and make change, and now I think there's like real questions about whether government is actually the best place to affect some of these things, or if there's anywhere, but it says a lot that I think he really did feel like, I can take my advocacy to the next level by just running for office in this way. So he sets, I love this acronym he adopts, EPIC, End Poverty in California. That's his platform. The word epic did not have the connotation in the 30s that it does now. So, he had like Epic News was the tabloid that he used to spread his messages, but that was just epic. I mean, I don't know if he coined that word.
It's gonna be epic.
Right.
It's so hard to divorce from what it means now.
Exactly. It's really funny. But it was truly this like grassroots thing. There were all these epic clubs around the state. There were like 800 by the time of the primaries. There was this newsletter that went out. It feels very grassroots, but also it feels very modern in many ways.
Yeah.
Well, in part it feels modern because of that media that you're talking about, that it wasn't unusual for there to be newspapers and pamphlets and things that had a political bent. That kind of was how U.S. newspapers were in the 19th century. But he creates this tabloid that's associated with the paper Epic News that actually draws upon the kinds of things that entice people to read it. So they do have these big splashy stories and really well done political cartoons. But he also takes advantage of his skills as a writer, and he writes this book called I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty, a True Story of the Future. And it's kind of brilliant, right? He creates this fictional book that's like, if I win this election, this is what the future is going to look like. And it sells like, hundreds of thousands of copies very quickly. Like it has a real audience, and it's such a smart and innovative way of sort of selling your campaign and your platform. This is what's going to happen. And because he's such a good writer, there's something very compelling and captivating about the vision that he lays out.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
And, it's the depression. People are starving. People are out of work. People are looking for government solutions to their problem. They want intervention. And so, a lot of he's not alone. And I think a lot of people that run for office understand how important it is to hit at these hard issues of poverty and food scarcity, and that if you don't reach someone's stomach, you really can't touch them in the places where it matters. You really can't have an impact. And I think people are super receptive to that in this moment.
And just to kind of point out, like, what people were receptive to. I mean, his proposals were literally like nationalizing farms and private businesses. I mean, you know, he was a socialist, you know, and I think these kinds of ideas had a lot more traction at the time. But, you know, he was the what was the name of his book? If I governor and
if
how
I did
ended
it.
poverty. I was gonna make the if I did it joke. I swear to God I was. But, you know, but his true story of the future basically involves, like, you know, the replacement of private economy. And so, you know, it's no small thing that he's proposing here.
There was an appetite for this at the time. Huey Long in Louisiana is running his Share the Wealth campaign. You have somebody like Father Coughlin before he goes, woohoo, who is also pushing for the same kind of the New Deal is thinking too small vision of what the future can look like. And so the appetite for a pretty broad range of political solutions, particularly from the left and from the socialist side of the spectrum, the Americans are pretty open to it because things are pretty bad.
That bad, yeah. And this is like, again, precedes LBJ's, like the Great Society and all of the programs that Johnson puts together to sort of like attack different, you know, areas of poverty and the war on poverty and all of that. This is, you know, it's coming decades earlier.
Yeah. So, no surprise, right? We've talked a number of times about how FDR is painted as a socialist and big business rallies against them basically from the jump. If they're doing that for him, you can imagine the pushback that starts to happen against Sinclair. And so big business rallies, not just in California, but around the country, millions of dollars come in. And I referenced this in the intro, but, you know, in many ways, some of the very first modern tactics were used in this campaign. Specifically, you have basically attack ads for the first time from ad men. There's one particular group called Campaigns Inc., which is just put together by a couple ad men who are brought on to basically create attack ads against Sinclair. And Hollywood gets involved too. And I think this was a subplot in that movie Mank. But, you know, it's set in that era. But, you know, the Hollywood gets rallied together, and there's efforts to use conservative forces there to create attack ads and to paint him in a certain light. And so you can really see the contours of kind of modern dirty politics emerging here.
I think the Hollywood angle of this story is really important because it's like that line, you never pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. In this sense, like, Sinclair comes into this race with one big advantage, and that is that he can tell a story that affects people. And then in the course of his campaign, he's like, you have all of these out-of-work actors. Maybe the studio system should let them be and let them go out and be able to work and make some money. And the studio system is like, no. And they take their, like, very powerful storytelling ability, and they use that in order to push back against Sinclair. And so there are all of these, like, they're not even it doesn't even say that this is being funded by Hollywood or by the opponents of Sinclair, but they make all of these, like, short films that are about, like, what the future will actually look like if Sinclair wins, what it is that you know, California voters really want, what they're really scared of, and it is all about ginning up support for the Republican ticket.
Yeah, and it's fear-mongering. It's all of, like, the dog whistles. It's, oh, if he wins, you know, these undesirables, these poor people, these dirty, homeless, illiterate people will come and they will take over and they will move out west, and, you know, they will have a sympathetic governor for them, and, you know, really creating a narrative of, like, is this what we want? And it's quite effective.
And they run in movie theater newsreels, you know, ahead of other news and maybe even ahead of commercial films.
This playing as part of newsreels is very important because we think a lot about how disinformation and misinformation operate today in a very flattened media landscape where it's difficult to tell the difference between a link to the New York Times and a link to, like, the Epoch Times or some of these other, like, far-right false news sources. And this is kind of the same thing, right? You're mixing propaganda in with news, and people who are watching think that they are watching one kind of information, journalism, when in fact they are imbibing something else, propaganda and political messaging.
Yeah, certainly that story famously would continue into World War II, where a lot of Hollywood was recruited to create propaganda films that would disguise as news and so forth. But yeah, a little bit more on this these ad men, I guess they were by the name of Whitaker and Baxter, were the two people behind this Campaigns Inc. And, Sinclair never puts the finger on them as the ones who kind of created these ads. He actually, when he talked about it, he would talk about Louis B. Mayer of MGM as being the kind of dirty trickster behind the scenes. But Baxter and Whitaker would then later kind of like in the 50s say they regretted working on this project. So it is really fascinating. I think Joe Lepore has written a little bit about this. So as I mentioned, Sinclair gets almost 1 million votes, 38% or so. He does lose to, by all accounts, a kind of just like no-name guy, Republican guy, but, just like neutral Republican force, so to speak. But he loses. But, I think that is a pretty significant vote total, and I think says a lot about this era.
38%, that's not nothing. Right. Really? Right. I mean, it's sizable.
Yeah. And he draws most of his vote from working class, and particularly working class male voters in areas like Los Angeles and San Francisco. He gets some votes from like miners and some other people who are experiencing high unemployment and the like. So he's connecting with the people who he wanted to connect with. It just wasn't quite enough to get him over the finish line.
Yeah. This epic movement continues a little bit after Sinclair is defeated. It goes on, and he still stays active. And, I was just reading about this, and sort of in passing, it makes a reference to, in his memoir that he wrote in 1968, Sinclair talked about that. And I was like, wow, man, Upton Sinclair still around in 1968, still engaged in, So, just a nice reminder that he's probably, he saw all this. He saw the New Deal. He saw World War II. He saw the rise of the 60s. So, yeah, pretty incredible.
Well, and epic-back candidates would really do very, very well in the Democratic Party going forward. And so there is this kind of longer legacy of Epic even after the failed campaign. Can I add one more thing, a little tidbit that I really enjoyed? So Upton Sinclair chose as his running mate Sheridan Downey. So it was Upton Sinclair and Sheridan Downey, and they called it the Uppy Downey ticket.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Between that and Epic, you got some good things going here. Yeah. Just last year, the mayor of Stockton, this guy Michael Tubbs, who is a universal basic income advocate and kind of progressive, he brought back End Poverty in California as the name of his nonprofit, a little ode there to Sinclair. So the name lives on, and of course now means something very different too, but there we go.
It still works.
It still works. Epic is good.
It's even better now.
Yeah, maybe even better.
Yeah, it is.
Wouldn't it be epic if we just could
ended poverty in California?
Poverty, yeah. All right. Well, we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is an all-in-one management software with apps for every business need. Odoo has apps for CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, manufacturing, and everything in between. And they're all in one easy-to-use software. And the best part about Odoo? All Odoo apps are integrated, helping you get things done faster and more efficiently. So, when you think about business, think Odoo. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's ODOO.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.